Welcome back. All right, we can talk about the St. Louis Blues today. Yep, why not? So the St. Louis Blues are 23, 24, and 4. They sit 5 points back of Calgary and 4 points back of Vancouver, which highlights that a team that's one game below 500 is still in the hunt for a playoff spot. It shows just how wide open things are in the West. And what's interesting is St. Louis has not got a record anywhere near as solid as last season at this time, where they were 28, 21, and 2. Now, they did make a change behind the bench. Under Bannister, they were 9, 12, and 1. They got that bump from adding Jim Montgomery as coach, and I think he's done a good job. The underlying numbers in St. Louis have been good since he took over. They're 14, 12, and 3 since he took over, which isn't bad. The problem is, of those 12 regulation losses, 3 of them in their most recent homestand, which just concluded. So they lost all 3 on that homestand. They have 1 win in their last 5 games. It feels like they're trending in the wrong direction again. And if they beat in Vancouver, we wouldn't have them 4 points behind Vancouver. And they wouldn't be 5 points behind Calgary. So it's one of those key games, and they just didn't get the goals when they needed them. The fact they've played 2 more games than both Calgary and Vancouver, that accentuates the problem here. They need help from other teams, and they're going to need to play really, really well down the stretch. And I'm not sure that this team is going to do that. So, looking at their upcoming schedule, we'll do this first. So on Friday, they're in Denver against Colorado. That's always a great game. These teams really don't like each other. Should be fun. Then they're in Utah on Sunday. Utah is kind of deceptively good right now. I know they're 4 and 6 in their last 10, but I've liked what Utah's been doing lately. Then St. Louis comes back home on Tuesday to play the Oilers. We all know how good the Oilers are right now. The Oilers have been one of the best teams in the league for a while. And then they're at home on Thursday, the 6th of February, against the Florida Panthers. Florida, defending Stanley Cup champions, we know what to expect from Florida. Then, to round things out before the Four Nations break, they're at home on Saturday, the 8th of February, against Chicago. That's a winnable game, but as Tampa learned last night, if you assume it's a winnable game, Chicago can beat you. And it feels like Chicago is starting to figure things out. I even considered doing a Chicago video today, and I opted for St. Louis instead, because it does feel like Chicago is starting to figure things out with this rebuild and start going in the right direction, which is bad news for the Blues, right? Because then that makes that a tougher game. So I wanted to look at the line combinations from their most recent game and just highlight where I think the issue is around the Blues. So you've got a top 6 with Neighbors, Thomas, and Buchnevich. It's a good line. It's not a bad line. Holloway, Shannon, Kyrou on the second line. Again, not a bad line. But is there a superstar player amongst the forwards on the St. Louis Blues? Is there somebody that you can say that's the guy? I don't think there is. Now, Kyrou and Thomas signed those contracts. We'll talk about them. I think those are aging okay, even though St. Louis and their play hasn't been fantastic. But the Blues, I think, need a superstar player up front. They need that Kaprizov, McKinnon, McDavid type player, and I don't know they have it. Neighbors is a good goal scorer and close, right? You put him in front of the net, he can tip pucks in like anybody's business. You want garbage goals or buried from the doorstep goals, if you don't want to call it a garbage goal, you can get that with Neighbors, right? Thomas is an excellent passer. Buchnevich is a pretty good all-around forward, and he's signed an extension. He's not going anywhere. Holloway signed that offer sheet. I think that's aged really well for them. He's been one of their most productive forwards recently. Shen is a veteran player. He probably won't get back to point per game status at any point the rest of the way. Kyrou is a very good player, good goal scorer, top point producer, I believe, on the team overall, even though Holloway has been that guy recently. And then you get into the bottom 6, and it is kind of interesting because Saad was on that third line in the last game. He has now been waived. He cleared waivers. He now heads down to the AHL. You have Nathan Walker. I like Walker's work ethic a lot. But one thing with this third line of Saad, Walker, and Bolduc, you don't really have the amount of offense you might want from a third line. And then Toropchenko, Foxa, and Joseph, all hardworking forwards. Joseph's got speed for days, but there's not any finish with this fourth line. And so that's an issue, right? You have a team that probably doesn't score enough goals to get above the playoff line right now, and I don't know if that's going to change before the season's done. Then on the blue line, you've got Broberg, who's been excellent since arriving in St. Louis. A bit quieter since that really hot start. Parayko, we know how good Parayko is. I've always liked Parayko. Even when he had a couple of down years, I still believed in Parayko. Cam Fowler, who has rediscovered his game since arriving in St. Louis. Falk, good productive defenseman, solid veteran. You have Suter. Suter's played forever. He does have holes in his game at this point, but that's why he's on the third pairing. And Tucker as well in that top six on the blue line. Now, it's a good blue line. It's not necessarily a great blue line, and that's the thing with St. Louis. You have some good players here, up front and on the blue line, and in net, Binnington. While I don't think he's playing as well as he can, Binnington's still a pretty darn good goaltender, and Hofer, I think, is a good backup as well. Um, there have been times people have debated that with me, that, my belief in Hofer. But, I mean, Binnington was a late bloomer. Nobody thought much about Binnington before he went on that run. And then he won a Stanley Cup. So with Hofer, I do see a pretty good goaltender there. Does he have his off nights? Sure. But so does Binnington. The one thing is, because Binnington won that Stanley Cup, I do feel like there's this protection around him from a lot of Blues fans, so that even when he doesn't play well, they will defer to the defense. They will defer to turnovers. They will defer to reasons. And I get it, because, they love Binnington. They don't want to say anything negative about Binnington. Now, their power play and their penalty kill are both an issue. 18.8% on the power play. They're 24th, which makes some sense, because there isn't really a go-to guy for that power play. They don't have an Ovechkin. They don't have a Kucherov. They don't have that style of player, right? Their penalty kill, 71.8%, is 28th. I'm honestly surprised the penalty kill isn't better, because you do have a good defense here. The goaltending's fine. You should have a better penalty kill than 71.8%. But if you look at month by month, you look at the record for this team, it's just been average to below average. October, they were 5-6. November, 6-6-2. December, 7-5-2, which is their best month. And then January, 5-7. So the numbers just have been kind of middling. So they could win. Let's say they win in Colorado. They go to 6-7 in the month of January. It's just they're plodding along, win loss kind of thing, right? Now, as I mentioned, they've lost 4 of their last 5, but they need to go on a winning streak, and I don't know that their upcoming schedule is conducive to a winning streak. So they could miss the playoffs for their third straight season. Their pending UFA list is short. Radek Faksa, who, if they put Fox out there, I think that we will see teams interested. One thing to keep in mind with them is they have all 3 of their retention slots available. So they can either broker a trade, or they can retain money on a player to move the player. And Faksa, if they have to do that, they can, right? So there's that side of it. But then their other 2 pending UFAs are Tucker and Suter. So there's nobody here who's a pending UFA that they're going to be moving necessarily, which then begs the question of, so do you move one of the bigger names? I don't think you do. I think if you're the general manager of this team, I don't think there's any reason to overcorrect. And I do think there's times where teams overcorrect. You definitely don't need to do a full-on sell, because you've still got a lot of good players that are in their prime or going into their prime, and you might as well see what they can do, right? Now, draft picks are tricky. So if this team was trying to add, you have to, throw in draft picks as sweeteners. They only have their own 1st, 5th, and 6th round picks this year. According to Puckpedia, that's all they have, is 3 draft picks. So they're not going to be moving draft picks to bring anybody in to bring this team up right now. Which really limits what they can do, unless they're willing to move, say, a prospect in order to get back a player if they decide to add a forward or add a defenseman. But I don't feel like this is a team that should do more than maybe stand pat, which has to be frustrating for Blues fans, because we're into year 3 of them missing the playoffs if that's the case. But I can still see kind of what's going on here. Now, one thing they need all the cap space in the world so they can really pursue big-name free agents. I am old enough to remember the St. Louis Blues of the late 80s, early 90s, who were not shy about spending money. And they brought in a lot of big names, a lot of high-profile players, and they had a lot of success in the regular season. Postseason, not as much, but regular season they did. they could absolutely, with the right splash in free agency, turn some heads their way, which could be good because this is a good team that I think just needs that game breaker. They need their Nathan McKinnon. Their I'm trying to think of Artemi Panarin with the Rangers. Like there are a lot of good to excellent players, and that's the kind of guy they need is that excellent forward who can bring them up. And I think if they can add a minute munching defenseman this summer too, sure, but we'll see how all that works out for them. They also do not have a second round draft pick for the next 3 years, so that's not a sweetener they can use in trades either. Now, the contract situation is interesting. When Kyrou and Thomas signed those deals, there was a lot of complaining about the fact they both got $8.13 million until 2031, and those contracts were bad. But I do think they're aging well. Look how many players are at $10 million or higher for their cap hit, and how many more are going to hit that total over the next couple years. Kyrou and Thomas are locked in at that $8.13 million cap hit until 2031. So that is a very shrewd move, I thought, with those contracts, and they're aging pretty well, even though the team's success on the ice isn't where they would want it to be. Now, Shen, $6.5 million until 2028. I figure he very likely sticks around. If he decides he wants to move to a team where he has a better chance to win a Stanley Cup, because I believe Shen's 33 at this point, so that's where you start to get into that talk about a guy wanting to have a chance to win a Stanley Cup, right? So Shen, $6.5 million until 2028. We'll see if anything happens there. I'm not saying this season, but maybe after this season kind of thing. Buchnevich's $8 million cap hit till 2031 means that Buchnevich, Thomas, and Kyrou is costing them a little over $24 million in cap space, again, until 2031. And if the salary cap goes up as high as it's expected to, that's not going to be a big problem for the St. Louis Blues. Now, Binnington has a $6 million cap hit until 2027. I don't think we'll see any change at any point with Binnington. I figure he spends his entire career with St. Louis. I just wanted to highlight his cap hit because depending on which side of the fence you're on, you may feel like Binnington's fine as a starter, everything's good. You may be concerned with underlying numbers if you view it from another perspective. But yeah, $6 million, considering some of the goalie contracts that are out there, I think that's perfectly fine. So again, with them having all three of their retention slots available, they could be a broker at the trade deadline. They have enough cap space to do it, where they could broker a deal from one team to another. Same thing Chicago did, right, in the Carolina-Chicago deal. They could do it as well. And they could do it to replenish their draft picks that they don't have. If they do that, then that basically would kind of be a signal of it's not going to happen this year. But you don't normally fire a coach if you don't want to get back into the hunt for a playoff spot and if you don't think that you can reach the playoffs. So I am going to be curious to see how St. Louis approaches the trade deadline. Do they do a sell where guys who are pending UFAs end up getting moved? Do they look for a taker for Saad? Maybe they retain some of the cap hit. He is now cleared waivers, can go to the AHL, so that might make him a more attractive trade target for a team because then you don't have to put him on waivers again. You could just leave him in the AHL, and then when there's an injury, you could call him up, right? So we'll see what happens there, but let me know your thoughts. What do you think the St. Louis Blues are going to do at the deadline, if anything? And do you think the Blues can force their way back into this playoff picture and get above the line? Or do you think the fact they've played more games than the teams they're chasing, plus they're 5 points out of the playoffs, is it too late for this season? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. Hit like and subscribe if you haven't done so already. Thank you guys so much for all your support as always. I will talk to you again soon.